Diving deep into REO properties, specifically how they play out here in the Chicagoland commercial real estate market. Now, to help us unpack this, we are tapping into the insights of Michael Linton. He's a commercial real estate broker who's been navigating the Chicago market for nearly 40 years. Yeah, he's seen it all.
That's a long time.
And you can find a ton of his insights over at chicagodealflow.com. That's actually where we're pulling a lot of our information from for this deep dive. So big shout out to Michael and the Chicago Deal Flow team for helping us out with this one. So before we get too far, let's just, level set here. When we say REO, we're talking about real estate owned properties.
Right.
And sometimes, when a borrower can't keep up with their mortgage payments, the property goes into foreclosure. And if it doesn't sell at auction, guess what? The lender, which is often a bank, ends up owning it. And that's when it becomes an REO property.
It's interesting because these REO properties, they're not just like this, random real estate trivia. They can actually be a direct reflection of what's happening, in the economy, the financial world,
Yeah.
and even in individual situations.
Okay, so let's break this down a little bit further. For someone who might be new to this whole REO thing,
Yeah.
can you walk us through how a property actually ends up in the bank's hands? It's not just like, poof, the bank owns it, right?
Right. Well, it's not magic, but sometimes it might feel that way. So let's just imagine like a hypothetical situation here. Let's say a local business owner here in Chicago, they've taken out a mortgage on a commercial property, maybe a small storefront. And unfortunately, things haven't been going so well, and they fall behind on their mortgage payments.
So they're in default. Like
Okay.
they're not holding up their end of the loan agreement.
Exactly. Now, the lender, usually a bank, doesn't want to just seize the property right away. They're going to try to recoup their losses through what's called a foreclosure auction. And this is where it gets interesting. They use something called a credit bid.
Credit bid.
Yeah, imagine it as the bank raising their hand at the auction saying, well, we're owed this much money plus all these extra costs we've racked up. So that's their credit bid. And the catch is, if no one else at the auction is willing to bid higher than the bank's credit bid, the bank automatically becomes the new owner. Boom, REO property.
Well, so it's like the bank is playing a game where they're both the participant and the referee. They're trying to get the best outcome for themselves, but they also end up holding the property if no one else steps up.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And this is something that Michael Linton, who we mentioned earlier, he really emphasizes this point. He sees it as this, almost paradoxical situation where banks, who are, primarily in the business of lending money, suddenly find themselves as property owners. Sometimes with a whole bunch of properties they didn't really plan on owning.
Yeah, it sounds like a whole different ballgame for them. You're usually thinking about interest rates and loan terms, not property taxes, and maintenance costs. Now, Michael seems to have a particular interest in REO properties, specifically in the Chicago market and its surrounding suburbs. What is it about this area that makes it, such a hotbed? Or maybe I should say cold spot for REO activity.
Well, Chicago, it's like this fascinating microcosm of economic forces. You've got, bustling downtown areas to sprawling suburbs, each with its own unique set of dynamics. And, these dynamics directly influence the REO landscape.
So it's not just about like the overall health of the economy, but also these very localized factors.
Exactly. Like Michael has this great example. Let's just take the retail sector in Schaumburg, for instance. Imagine a situation where online shopping and, changing consumer habits have led to like an oversaturation of retail space. That can lead to lower occupancy rates, which means landlords might struggle to make their mortgage payments. And guess what that can lead to?
Foreclosures.
More foreclosures and, subsequently more REOs.
It's like that domino effect you were talking about earlier. But now we're seeing how it plays out in like specific areas.
Right. And it can be very hyper-local.
Within the Chicago market.
Exactly. And Michael goes even further to say that it's not just about the overall economic climate or even, these hyper-local situations. The actual condition of the property itself plays a massive role in whether it becomes REO. Think about it. If you were a potential buyer at a foreclosure auction, would you be more interested in a shiny new office building in a prime location or a rundown warehouse in an area that's seen better days?
Yeah, probably the new office building. Less headache, right?
Exactly. And that's where Michael's insights really become valuable. He paints this picture of how a property's condition its location. And even its specific use can make it more or less likely to end up as REO. Like, imagine, for example, a large industrial property out in Elgin that needs significant environmental remediation. That's a huge red flag for potential buyers, which could, scare them away from bidding at the auction, making it more likely for the bank to end up as the owner.
So it's almost like a property can get stuck in this financial quicksand. And the harder it is to get out, the more likely it is to become REO. And speaking of financial quicksand, Michael uses this term underwater to describe a particularly tricky situation.
Oh, yeah. Underwater is crucial. Underwater basically means that the outstanding mortgage on the property is actually higher than the property's current market value. It's like owing more on your car than the car is actually worth.
Yeah.
Makes it incredibly difficult to sell, even at a foreclosure auction.
Right, because why would anyone pay more for a property than it's actually worth? Especially when they might have to deal with all sorts of other complications on top of that.
Exactly. You're starting to see the bigger picture here. We've got the overall economic climate, the specific dynamics of different areas within the Chicago market, the condition of the property itself, and now this whole concept of being underwater financially. It's like all these forces are converging to create this perfect storm for REO properties.
And I'm guessing the auction process itself can add fuel to the fire. Michael mentions that in Cook County. If no one outbids the lender at the auction, the property automatically becomes REO. That seems like a pretty big deal.
Yeah, it is a big deal. It basically highlights how, the very structure of the auction process can tip the scales in favor of the bank ending up with the property. Sometimes, potential buyers might not even be aware of the auction, or they might not have the financial resources to participate, especially if like a cash-only bid is required.
So it's not always a level playing field. It almost feels like the system is kind of set up to make it easier for the bank to become the owner.
Hmm.
And then, of course, you've got all the legal and regulatory hurdles that can further complicate things.
Oh, totally. Like, Illinois has a particularly long foreclosure timeline, sometimes averaging almost 1,000 days.
Wow.
Think about that. A property sitting vacant, potentially deteriorating for nearly 3 years.
That's going to add a whole other layer of challenges.
It absolutely does. You've got potential zoning changes in certain suburbs, complications with tenant rights, all sorts of, legal complexities that can make it even harder to sell a property at auction. It's this tangled web of factors that contribute to the REO landscape.
And I imagine this whole situation has some pretty significant ripple effects on the banks themselves. What happens when they end up with a whole bunch of REO properties on their books?
Well, it's not exactly a cause for celebration in the boardroom.
Right.
REO properties become what's known as non-performing assets for the bank. They're not generating any income, and in fact, they're costing the bank money. They're stuck with properties that are actually draining their resources.
So it's like they've suddenly become accidental landlords.
Mm.
And not the kind who collect rent every month. They're stuck with properties that are actually costing them money.
Yeah, and it's not just about missing out on potential income. The bank now has to foot the bill for property taxes, insurance maintenance, all while they're trying to figure out how to actually sell these REOs. And these costs can add up quickly, especially if the property has been neglected or is located in an area with high carrying costs.
It's like this financial headache that keeps getting worse.
Yeah.
So what does a bank actually do when they're in this situation? It's not as simple as just, slapping a for sale sign on the property and hoping for the best, right?
Right, definitely not. Michael, breaks down this process really well. The first thing a bank needs to do is kind of get a clear picture of what they're dealing with. They need to assess the property's condition, get like a realistic appraisal of its market value, understand any potential legal or environmental issues that might be lurking beneath the surface.
So it's like a deep dive into the property's history, its current state, and what it might realistically fetch in the market.
Exactly. And then, of course, they need to secure the property and make sure it's not, falling apart while they're trying to sell it. This could involve anything from basic maintenance, like landscaping and snow removal, to more serious repairs if there's been like damage or neglect.
I can imagine those costs adding up pretty quickly, especially if you're talking about multiple properties. And I'm guessing this is where those REO asset managers come into play.
You got it. Banks often turn to these specialized professionals who really know the ins and outs of managing and selling REO properties. They're kind of like the bank's secret weapon in navigating this whole REO maze.
So they're bringing in the cavalry to handle a situation that's outside the bank's usual area of expertise.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about the actual selling strategies. What are some of the ways that banks try to get these REO properties off their books?
Well, they have a few different tricks up their sleeve. They might list the property with local real estate agents who have a good understanding of that specific market, say someone who really knows the industrial market in Elgin or the retail scene in Niles. So that taps into the agent's local network and expertise.
So it's about leveraging the power of local knowledge rather than just kind of casting a wide net and hoping for the best.
Exactly. And then you've got the online world, which has become a major player in real estate. Banks might use platforms like ZillowRealtor.com, or they might even have their own dedicated REO websites. to showcase their properties to a wider audience.
And so it's all about maximizing exposure, reaching those potential buyers who might be specifically looking for REO deals.
Right. And then there are the more aggressive tactics. Sometimes banks will offer, pretty significant discounts to entice buyers and move the property quickly, especially if they're feeling the pressure to reduce their REO holdings.
So it's like a balancing act between trying to recoup as much of their losses as possible
Yeah.
and just getting the property off their books and stopping the financial bleeding.
Exactly. And in some cases, they might even do bulk sales, selling multiple REO properties to investors who are looking to acquire, a portfolio of assets at a discounted price. It's kind of like the real estate version of buying in bulk at Costco.
It's fascinating to see how banks operate in this whole REO world. Now, I know Michael sees REO properties as potential gold mines for investors, but he's also quick to point out that there are some serious risks involved. Why is that?
Well, it's easy to get caught up in the excitement of, a potential bargain. You see a property listed at a price that seems too good to be true, and you might rush into a decision without fully understanding, the potential pitfalls. So Michael's big message is that due diligence is absolutely essential when it comes to REO investments.
So it's not just about finding a good deal, it's about understanding what you're getting into and being prepared for the unexpected. What are some of those hidden dangers that investors need to be aware of?
Well, for starters, the property itself might require significant repairs or renovations that weren't immediately apparent. There could be hidden liens on the property, meaning other creditors have a claim to it, or there might be title issues that need to be resolved. All of this can translate into, significant costs and delays for the unwary investor.
So it's like peeling back the layers of an onion. And sometimes what you find underneath isn't so pleasant. And then, of course, there's the whole issue of the property potentially being vacant for a long time, especially given the lengthy foreclosure timelines in Illinois.
Exactly. That vacancy can lead to further deterioration, which means more costs for the new owner. Plus, there's the added risk of vandalism or even squatters if the property hasn't been properly secured. It's a whole other set of headaches that investors need to factor into their calculations.
So it sounds like you really need to know what you're doing when it comes to REO investing. It's not for the faint of heart or the inexperienced.
That's where Michael's advice really hits home. He's a huge advocate for working with experienced professionals who know the REO market inside and out. A seasoned real estate agent, a lawyer who specializes in real estate transactions, a knowledgeable contractor. They can make all the difference in navigating these complexities and avoiding costly mistakes.
So it's like assembling your dream team of REO experts to guide you through the process.
Yeah.
Now, Michael seems to be particularly bullish on REO opportunities in the Chicago market.
Mm-hmm.
What is it about this area that makes it so attractive for REO investors?
Well, he sees Chicago as this dynamic market with a lot of potential for growth and revitalization. He points out that, certain neighborhoods and suburbs are undergoing significant transformations, attracting new residents, businesses, and
So it's about identifying those areas that are on the upswing, where REO properties might be undervalued and offer the potential for significant returns as the area continues to improve.
Exactly. And Michael, with his deep understanding of the Chicago market, is able to pinpoint those areas that are ripe for this kind of investment. He might, for example, highlight a neighborhood that's seeing an influx of young professionals, or a suburb that's attracting new businesses and development projects.
So it's like having an insider's guide to where the action is going to be in the REO world.
But even with all this potential, it sounds like REO investing in Chicago still requires a cautious approach and a healthy dose of realism.
Absolutely. It's about balancing optimism with a clear understanding of, the potential risks and challenges. It's about approaching REO investments with both eyes wide open, knowing that while there are great opportunities out there, there are also plenty of pitfalls to avoid.
So it's not just about jumping in headfirst. It's about being strategic, doing your homework, and having the right team in your corner. Now, I know we've been talking a lot about the technicalities of REO properties, the financial aspects, the legalities, the market dynamics. But I kind of want to shift gears for a moment and talk about the human side of all of this. Yeah, I think that's incredibly important. It's easy to get caught up in the numbers and the transactions and forget that behind every REO property, there's a human story.
Exactly. There's a reason why that property ended up in foreclosure in the first place. It might be a business owner who struggled to keep their doors open, a family who faced a financial setback, or a developer whose ambitious plans went awry. These are real people with real lives that have been impacted by the forces that created these REO situations.
And Michael, with his long history in the Chicago market, he really understands that. He's seen firsthand how economic downturns, market shifts, personal circumstances can all converge to create these situations.
So it really humanizes the whole concept and reminds us that we're not just talking about bricks and mortar, we're talking about people's lives and livelihoods.
And that's something to keep in mind. Whether you're an investor looking at REO properties as potential opportunities, a homeowner concerned about the state of the market, or just someone who wants to understand, the forces that shape our communities.
It's interesting. What I find really interesting is this whole deep dive into REO properties. It's almost like it's given us this glimpse into how seemingly separate things are actually deeply connected. We've seen how changes in the economy, shifts in consumer behavior, even individual financial decisions can all kind of contribute to the creation of these REO situations.
Yeah, it's like this intricate web of cause and effect.
Yeah.
Even seemingly small events can have far-reaching consequences. And the REO market is kind of a reflection of that interconnectedness.
Exactly. The real estate market, for all its complexities, is ultimately, a reflection of human behavior, economic forces, and the decisions we make, both individually and collectively.
It's a powerful insight to carry with you, whether you're an investor, a homeowner, or just someone who wants to understand the world a little bit better.
So for our listeners, next time you hear about foreclosures, REO properties,
Hmm.
or even just the ups and downs of the real estate market, remember what we've talked about today. Think about those connections, those ripple effects, those human stories that are woven into this, complex world.
Yeah, it might just change the way you see things. And who knows, it might even lead you to some exciting opportunities or help you avoid some costly mistakes.
Well said. And on that note, we'll bring this deep dive to a close. A huge thank you to Michael Lenton and the Chicago Deal Flow team for providing us with such incredible insights. And for our listeners, don't forget to check out chicagodealflow.com for a wealth of information on REO properties and the Chicago real estate market. Until next time, happy investing.